It was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of joy, laughter, and gratitude under the soft glow of string lights in the parking lot behind the store. Balloons rustled in the breeze, folding chairs clattered, and the scent of barbecue floated in the warm afternoon air. Employees from Price Right Superstore clinked soda cans and posed for photos with their families. It was Employee Appreciation Day. But by sundown, the parking lot would be marked by blood, screams, and disbelief. At 4:17 p.m., in front of nearly 24 coworkers, shoppers, and children, a single crack split the air. Then another. A respected shift supervisor collapsed to the pavement, blood soaking through her blue uniform. She reached out, eyes wide with confusion, then pain, before she stopped moving. Chaos erupted. The shooter didn't say a word. He just walked away. Shannon Miller, 33, wasn't just a shift supervisor, she was the calm in the storm. Dependable. Empathetic. The kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and picked up extra hours without being asked. She had worked at Price Right for nearly 8 years, slowly working her way up from cashier to floor supervisor. Customers adored her. So did most of her team. She lived just 15 minutes from the store in a modest ranch-style home with her husband Greg and their 12-year-old son, Justin. Weekdays were a blur of school drop-offs, evening dinners, and late shifts. Shannon's world revolved around stability, and she had built it from the ground up after a rocky start in her 20s. Her colleagues described her as mom energy with a clipboard, stern when she had to be, but always fair. That's what made it so chilling when she became the target. Across the store, in the electronics department, 26-year-old Brian Reddick had been silently simmering. He had started at Price Right just over a year ago, taking a full-time stock position after struggling to hold down employment elsewhere. He was quiet, awkward, some said. Others just called him a loner. He rarely spoke unless prompted, and when he did, his responses were curt, eyes darting downward. Management had flagged him a few times for poor punctuality, but nothing serious. Still, there was always something brittle about his presence, like a rubber band stretched too thin. Shannon, ever professional, had warned him 3 weeks before the incident about continued tardiness. The conversation was private, routine, and respectful. But for Brian, it struck a nerve. He felt exposed, humiliated. That feeling grew. At first, he withdrew further, avoiding eye contact and lingering too long in break rooms. Then came the notebook, filled with erratic handwriting, names of coworkers, times, phrases like, "They don't see me," and "She made me nothing." No one noticed. Brian's apartment was 2 miles from the store. He lived alone, behind closed blinds and a broken porch light. Rent was overdue. His bank account hovered near zero. He had no family nearby and hadn't spoken to old friends in months. Behind his locked door, anger festered, unchecked, untreated. On the morning of the store's employee event, Brian didn't clock in. No one found it odd, he wasn't scheduled. But he came anyway. Dressed in jeans and a gray hoodie, he slipped through the crowd unnoticed at first. In the waistband of his hoodie, beneath the hem, was a concealed handgun. At 4:17 p.m., he found her. And in one shattering moment, everything collapsed. The sound of the first gunshot caused a ripple of confusion. People paused mid-bite, turning their heads in disbelief, unsure if it was a firework or some kind of prank. But the second shot, closer, sharper, erased all doubt. Screams tore through the crowd as folding chairs crashed over and families scrambled behind tables. Balloons popped underfoot. Someone shouted, "Call 911." A mother grabbed her toddler and ran, sobbing. Another employee fell to their knees beside Shannon's motionless body, begging her to stay with us. Shannon had been standing near the drinks table, chatting with a coworker about her son's science fair project. When the bullet struck her side, then her chest, she crumpled almost instantly. Her body hit the pavement with a sickening thud. Blood pooled quickly beneath her, seeping into the cracks between concrete slabs. Brian didn't run. He walked, deliberate, mechanical, past the store's back wall, through the hedges, and into the woods bordering the lot. Surveillance footage later showed him disappearing into the treeline, a gray blur against the thick green. He vanished before the police arrived. Within minutes, the scene was sealed off. First responders pushed through the panicked crowd, triaging the injured, although Shannon was clearly the worst hit. Paramedics worked frantically, loading her into an ambulance. Her husband, Greg, arrived just as they were closing the doors. He didn't speak, just stood there, ashen, clutching Justin's baseball glove. At 5:02 p.m., Shannon Miller was pronounced dead at Capital Regional Medical Center. As law enforcement scrambled to understand what had happened, Brian was already deep in the woods. A multi-agency manhunt began before sunset. County sheriff deputies, city police, K-9 units, and even state troopers joined the search. Helicopters circled overhead as officers combed through trees, ravines, and abandoned sheds. News stations were already flashing his face across the screen, a mugshot from a previous job dispute in another county. Inside Brian's small apartment, detectives found the notebook. Each page told a story of unraveling, incoherent scribbles, surveillance-like entries on Shannon's routines, and diagrams of the store's layout. There were no threats, no manifesto, just an obsessive spiral into bitterness. Underneath his bed, they found empty fast food wrappers, piles of unopened bills, and a shoebox holding a single snapshot, a group photo of store staff at last year's appreciation event. Shannon stood in the middle, smiling, clipboard in hand. He had circled her face. The night after the shooting, a 911 call came in. It was Brian. The call was brief, less than a minute. His voice was low, almost robotic. "Tell them I did it. Tell them I didn't want to. But she made me invisible. I didn't matter. Not to her." When the operator asked for his location, he hung up. It was a breadcrumb. A chilling one. Authorities traced the call to a ranger station 3 miles from the store. They found evidence he had broken in, food wrappers, stolen maps, and a battery-powered radio. But he was gone again by the time officers arrived. The forest thickened. Tension rose. This was no longer just a murder investigation, it had become a manhunt. For 2 days, the woods behind the Price Right superstore became the center of a tense and unpredictable pursuit. Law enforcement fanned out in every direction, armed, exhausted, and under mounting pressure to find Brian Reddick before he struck again. Drones buzzed overhead, cutting arcs through the sky. Officers in tactical gear moved through thickets, calling his name and sweeping abandoned cabins and deer blinds. Each snapped twig sent pulses of anxiety through the teams. They knew he was armed. They knew he was dangerous. What they didn't know was how far gone he really was. The search radius widened. Water bottles, empty granola wrappers, and torn scraps of a trail map marked his path. He was scavenging, moving carefully, avoiding cameras and main roads. A camouflage jacket was found draped over a fallen log, soaked from morning dew. He had left it behind, either careless or calculated. Then came the second 911 call. It was shorter. Unsettling. "You won't find me. This place knows me. I was never supposed to be seen anyway." The dispatcher tried to trace it, but Brian had used another pay-as-you-go burner, likely stolen from a ranger station. The call was traced to an area near Devil's Hollow, a stretch of forest known for steep terrain and forgotten trails. Locals whispered about it. Hunters avoided it. That night, a perimeter was formed. At dawn, the standoff began. A pair of deputies spotted a flicker of movement in the trees near a ravine. As they approached, a shot rang out. Then another. Brian was there, positioned behind a fallen tree, partially camouflaged with brush, his gun drawn. Officers shouted for him to surrender. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened fire. The scene erupted. Gunfire cracked through the morning mist as officers ducked for cover. A tactical team moved in, circling around the ravine to flank his position. For nearly 10 minutes, the forest became a battlefield, shouts, return fire, the crunch of boots over leaves. Then came silence. One officer moved forward, cautiously. Brian was slumped against the trunk of an old oak, blood soaking through his hoodie. The weapon was still in his lap. His eyes were open, but lifeless. He had been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the chest. The coroner later confirmed it was the chest wound that killed him. The standoff was over. But the devastation had only just begun. In the following hours, the crime scene stretched wider. Investigators recovered more notes from his pockets, fragments torn from his original notebook, still scrawled with chaotic handwriting. Phrases like, "They made me a shadow," and "This world was never mine," filled the margins. There was no manifesto. No apology. Just echoes of a man lost long before he picked up the gun. The news of Brian Reddick's death spread quickly, but it did little to bring comfort. If anything, it deepened the unease. There would be no trial. No answers under oath. No explanation for why Shannon Miller, a woman so widely admired, had been hunted down and executed in front of her coworkers. Detectives pored through Brian's sparse life. His apartment, once dark and silent, now buzzed with evidence teams cataloging every scrap of paper, every hard drive, every item left behind. What emerged was not a single motive, but a slow, grinding descent. He had no criminal record. No known history of substance abuse. Toxicology confirmed there were no drugs or alcohol in his system during the shooting. But what investigators found instead was a pattern of neglect, emotional, psychological, and financial. His emails were unopened. Bills overdue. A notice from his landlord warned of eviction. A job performance file from a previous employer described uncontrolled anger and withdrawal from staff. He had seen a counselor, once, 2 years prior, but never returned after the initial session. In his spiral, Brian hadn't cried out for help. He had whispered it, quietly, in forgotten corners. And no one heard. Back at Pricerite, grief gripped the store like a fog. The building reopened a week later, but nothing was the same. The break room was silent. Empty chairs stayed empty. Some employees left quietly, unable to return to the place where they had watched a friend die. Others tried to hold on, out of necessity or guilt. Management brought in grief counselors. But for many, it felt hollow. Staff whispered about the memo HR had sent months earlier, encouraging supervisors to manage conflicts discreetly and redirect negative energy. It didn't mention security. It didn't prepare anyone for what had come. Shannon's funeral was held at Grace Hill Baptist Church. Hundreds attended, co-workers, friends, customers, and complete strangers. Her husband, Greg, stood beside her casket in a navy suit, eyes hollow but steady. Justin, dressed in the same tie he wore at school concerts, clung to his uncle's hand. There were no eulogies from management. But outside, someone had laid her name in white carnations across the store's front windows. Another had taped a handwritten note. "You mattered. We saw you." In the weeks that followed, lawsuits began to emerge. Several employees joined a civil suit against the store's corporate office, alleging negligence in security measures and failure to respond to concerns about Brian's behavior. Emails surfaced from employees who had reported feeling unsafe around him, describing his habit of standing too close, lingering in parking lots, or staring without speaking. The company issued a brief statement of sympathy but avoided further comment. Meanwhile, new protocols were rolled out, security guards stationed at entrances, mandatory de-escalation training, and stricter reporting channels for behavioral concerns. Cameras were added to the parking lot. Lockers were searched randomly. The measures were necessary, but for many, they came too late. The community responded in ways no policy could predict. Vigils were held outside the store each week, candles flickering in plastic cups. A local artist painted a mural on the back alley wall, Shannon's face beneath a blooming tree, her name etched in sunlight. Customers left cards, flowers, and even grocery lists near the checkout line she used to supervise. Everyone grieved differently. Some people wept openly. Others just stood in silence. But all of them understood something unspoken. Safety, once assumed, had vanished. And nothing, not security cameras, not apologies, not even justice, could bring it back. There would be no court date for Brian Reddick. No jury. No sworn testimony. But the legal aftermath of the shooting still unfolded like a slow-moving trial, one fought not in a courtroom, but through interviews, affidavits, and emotional depositions. The civil lawsuit filed by Shannon Miller's family, along with several surviving employees, targeted the Price-Right Corporation directly. It alleged that the company failed to take basic steps that might have prevented the tragedy, ignoring warning signs, dismissing employee complaints, and failing to enforce or even establish workplace safety protocols. In the suit, coworkers described Brian's behavior in detail, how he stood in corners muttering to himself, how he seemed to stare through people rather than at them, how his mood could swing violently in silence. More than one employee said they had brought their concerns to a supervisor. One even emailed HR directly, citing concerns about safety if things boil over. Nothing was done. The company's lawyers pushed back. They claimed Brian's actions were unforeseeable and isolated. But leaked internal memos showed that the company had discussed staffing tensions in the weeks before the shooting, including Brian's name, though no follow-up occurred. That single oversight became the cornerstone of the lawsuit. Behind closed doors, the company moved to settle, quietly, quickly. Confidential payouts were offered. NDAs were signed. The amount wasn't disclosed, but the silence that followed spoke volumes. To the public, the store remained open. To those inside, it was forever changed. In the midst of litigation and grief, something else quietly took shape, a memorial. A simple bronze plaque was installed near the entrance of the store, beside the spot where Shannon had once greeted customers. It read, "In memory of Shannon Miller. Supervisor. Colleague. Friend. Taken from us too soon, but never forgotten." Beside the plaque, a concrete bench was placed, wrapped in soft ivy and flowers planted by Shannon's former team. Every week, someone left fresh carnations there. No one ever saw who. But the most enduring tribute didn't come from the store. It came from her family. Greg and Justin launched a small scholarship in Shannon's name for local high school students pursuing leadership or community service. Funded through donations, bake sales, and one tireless GoFundMe campaign, it awarded its first recipient just 6 months later, a teenage girl who planned to become a social worker. During the award ceremony, Greg stood on stage, his voice shaking. Shannon believed in people, even when they made mistakes, even when they were angry or struggling. She always said kindness is discipline with dignity. That's who she was. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. But for those closest to the crime, healing wasn't linear. It wasn't even really healing. Several employees quietly resigned within the first year. Some relocated. Others changed fields entirely. The sound of a balloon popping or a loud bang near the break room could still send some into panic. Therapists were made available. Support groups were formed. But the weight remained. Trauma had taken root, not as a single event, but as something folded into the rhythm of daily life. The store ran like it always had. Shelves were stocked. Registers opened. But nothing was the same. And for many, it never would be. Months turned into a year. The headlines faded. The vigils dwindled. But grief didn't follow the same schedule. For those left behind, the aftermath of Shannon's murder became something quieter, but no less consuming. It was there in the empty chair at dinner. In the gap at staff meetings. In the changed rhythm of a routine once taken for granted. Her husband, Greg, tried to keep life moving for their son, Justin. Mornings became mechanical, cereal, car rides, reminders to brush teeth. But every so often, Justin would stop in the hallway and just stare at the framed photo of his mom in her Price Right badge. He didn't cry often. He just grew quieter. He stopped talking about school projects. Stopped asking about baseball. He started drawing instead, mostly trees, storm clouds, and a woman standing beneath them with her hand raised. Always the same figure. Always smiling, even when the rain fell. Greg tried therapy. Tried church. Tried calling old friends. But nothing filled the space Shannon had left. She had been the anchor. Without her, everything drifted. He eventually took a leave from work. Then a longer one. No one called it depression. It didn't need a name. For Shannon's former team at Price Right, the memory of that day clung to everything. Some couldn't bear to enter the parking lot where it happened. Others found themselves haunted by the smallest things, a certain scent, the sound of laughter, the flicker of blue lights. One cashier, Marlene, admitted she flinched every time a customer raised their voice, no matter how harmless the complaint. "Some days I feel fine," she told a coworker. "Then I see a gray hoodie and I freeze. Just freeze." Human Resources implemented monthly mental health check-ins. Attendance was inconsistent. Most staff didn't want to talk about it. They just wanted to forget. But trauma doesn't forget. It shows up in muscle memory, in dreams, in the way someone double-checks a locked door for the 5th time. The store's general manager, Harold Ames, rarely spoke publicly about the shooting. But behind closed doors, he had begun rethinking everything. He pushed for more proactive safety policies. Installed metal detectors at the entrances. Hired on-site counselors for overnight shifts. Even introduced a Wellness Wednesday initiative, a quiet room with tea, books, and no expectations. Some staff appreciated it. Others found it performative. Still, it was something. What Harold couldn't change, though, was the quiet. Lunchtimes that once buzzed with chatter were now hushed. Jokes landed less often. Birthdays were acknowledged but not celebrated. The spark was gone, replaced with cautious glances and a shared, unspoken bond. They had survived something unthinkable. And survival came at a price. Out in the community, Shannon's name became shorthand for loss and resilience. Church sermons referenced her integrity. School counselors reminded students that everyone carries invisible burdens. A local poet wrote a piece titled "The Quiet Supervisor," which was read aloud at a town hall on workplace violence prevention. Even as time moved forward, she remained a fixture, not just in memory, but in meaning. Because what happened wasn't just tragic. It was preventable. And everyone knew it. Life didn't go back to normal. It simply continued. The aisles at Price Right buzzed again with carts and conversations. New hires arrived, unaware of the blood that once stained the parking lot. Most of the shoppers had moved on, their memories dulled by distance. But for those who were there that day, for Shannon's family, her team, the first responders, time hadn't erased anything. It had only rearranged the pain into quieter shapes. Justin, now 13, began speaking about his mother more openly. He wrote an essay in school titled "The Strongest Person I Ever Knew." It ended with the line, "My mom didn't wear a cape, but she saved people by showing up every day and caring. Greg framed that page. Each year on the anniversary of her death, a small group gathered at the bench by the plaque. No speeches. No press. Just a handful of people who remembered. They brought coffee. They brought carnations. They shared stories. And they sat. Because sometimes, that's all grief asks, to sit in its company and not pretend it isn't still there. The case of Shannon Miller never became national news. It didn't inspire documentaries or trending hashtags. But in her town, in her store, in the lives she touched, it changed everything. It forced hard conversations about workplace safety, mental health, and the subtle ways resentment can take root when no one is watching. It exposed the cracks in corporate policies, the blind spots in management, and the silence that can follow a cry for help when that cry doesn't come in the form people expect. It reminded people that kindness matters, but so does vigilance. And that sometimes, even when we do everything right, tragedy still finds a way in. There's a phrase often used in the wake of loss: healing. But healing isn't what happened here. There was no fixing, no erasing, no magical return to before. What came instead was adaptation. People folded their grief into morning routines, into grocery trips, into moments of pause between tasks. The pain didn't go away, it just learned to walk beside them. And that's what remains. Not just the memory of the violence, but the life that preceded it. The laughter Shannon brought to breakroom birthdays. The quiet strength she carried in her clipboard and smile. The people who remember her not as a victim, but as a presence. Not gone. Just absent.